Hi, I'm Sunshiny Star, and I am your hostess today for Seaside Shadows Haunted History Tours Cemetery Saturday. It's a spooky day here in Liberty Hill Cemetery in Lebanon, Connecticut. We've gotten some snow overnight, and there's frost on the pumpkin, and I'm here to tell you the story of a dear friend of mine, Captain Sluman Gray. Now, Captain Sluman Gray really desires to have his story told, and so this is why I'm telling it today for you. Now, there are two stories on the account of Captain Sluman Gray. There's the official story, and then there's the unofficial story. Today, we're going to start with the official story. So let's begin. Captain Sluman Gray was a very experienced whaling captain. He and his wife Sarah and 3 of their children went out aboard the James Murray whaling ship from New Bedford in 1864. New Bedford, Massachusetts was a hub of the whaling industry and the whaling community at that time. They were headed out to find a better hunting ground for the whales in the South Pacific waters. Even though the whaling industry was still young, many fishermen sought out happier hunting grounds there in the South Pacific and in the Bering Strait and all the way up to the Arctic. Now, as this time period is occurring, it is during our Civil War. Our Civil War in America that tore the North and the South apart. The James Murray soon becomes the victim of a Confederate raiding ship known as the Shenandoah. The Shenandoah was said to have unleashed pure hell on the unarmed whaling ship. The story goes that Captain Gray was mortally wounded during this battle, and that Sarah Gray begged and pleaded with the captain of the Shenandoah to keep Captain Gray's body aboard until such time that it could be transported back to Connecticut for a proper burial. The Confederate captain agreed to her request, and with no better options available at the time or on board, our dear captain's body was placed within a casket of rum, preserving the body before heading home. Now, one thought here, however, is that once home, the widow decided to lay him to rest as is. His body was never unpacked. There was never a recording of a casket being made for Captain Sluman. So now that we have the nice, neat official story about a Confederate ship and possible war martyr, well, let's dig a little bit deeper now into some of the legends and the rumors surrounding this very exciting story. Sluman Gray and his wife do hail from Lebanon, Connecticut. Captain Gray is the captain of the whaling vessel, the James Murray. The James Murray did in fact set sail from New Bedford in June of 1864, looking for happier hunting grounds for the whaling industry. It is interesting that his wife Sarah joined him on the trip. It wasn't forbidden, and there was no rule against it. However, for the time period, it was unusual. They also were joined by 3 of their children. 3 of their 8 children, to be exact, were aboard on this trip. At the age of 51 years old, Captain Sluman has gained a lot of wealth and prosperity from his whaling industry. A lot of his wealth has come from taking these very dangerous trips out to hunt whales, which is absolutely a dangerous occupation, and he's lived to be 51 years old and he's still doing it. Now, his reputation among his crew was that he was somewhat ruthless and that he was not above whipping someone in public to prove his point, especially over very minor, slight infractions that seemed to infuriate him. We do hear, however, that he was very, very kind to his wife, Sarah, and he loved her very much and did not, in fact, ever beat her, as far as we know. So even though there were plenty of whaling waters all around New England, the competition from other countries and companies began to push our sailors further and further out to find abundant, prosperous pods of whales to hunt. It was not uncommon in the 1860s for whaling vessels to take their journeys that spanned over many years, making their way to the South Pacific in search of the prized whale oil. Approximately 9 months into the journey, the James Murray was in the South Pacific Seas, in fact, very near Guam. That is quite a ways to sail from coastal New England. So while they were near Guam, looking for some new pods of whales to hunt, the captain became very ill. According to the ship's log, Captain Gray took his last breath on March 24th, 1865. The ship's log states that the captain expired after an illness of 2 days at 2 p.m. That's quite different from being killed during a battle with a Confederate ship, isn't it? In her letter writing to people back at home, Sarah describes his sickness as an inflammation of the bowels. So very big difference between the stories, and I suppose I can understand that the original story was told to keep our dear captain dignified beyond his death. It was also recorded in the captain's log that Captain Gray had been preserved within spirits, which does account for the tale of the rum cask for his casket. Now, what of the Shenandoah? What of the Shenandoah? Let me tell you, the James Murray did in fact have an encounter with the Shenandoah. However, it was after our dear captain had passed. And he was already on board as a post-mortem stowaway. The James Murray, with Sarah, her 3 children, and crew, were continuing on to the Bering Sea for summer whale hunting. Now, I could see how this next bit could actually happen. The Shenandoah was still out on patrol, even though the Civil War had been declared over 2 months previous. They were not aware of this fact, and they continued to fight and sink as many Union ships as possible. Under the command of James I. Waddell, the Shenandoah, this incredible 230-foot, armed to the teeth vessel, captured 24 unarmed whaling vessels in June 1865 alone. In fact, the Shenandoah was said to have set off the very last shot in all of the Civil War. This is a very historic ship. Most of the ships that the Shenandoah captured or overtook were either sunk or burned, and the ranks were taken prisoner. Because Sarah and her sons were aboard the James Murray, the very kind gentleman of the South spared the ship, as it was considered cowardly to harm women and children during war. 222 prisoners set sail to Honolulu aboard the James Murray, where upon arriving, the ship and her crew were ransomed. After their release, the widow Gray and her children made their way home to Lebanon, Connecticut over the next half year. Finally, they arrived in March 1866, almost an entire year after the passing of our dear captain. They arrived with Captain Gray's casket intact. He was interned here at Liberty Hill Cemetery, his body still preserved within the barrel below. As I mentioned, there never was a recording for a casket to be prepared for the captain. And thus, in those days, those types of recordings were very important to the town records. So I believe the captain is still here within his barrel. And so why the two differing tales? Well, it's quite obvious, isn't it? One is a dignified death and the other not so much. There are tales of hauntings in this very graveyard. Could it be our captain, Sluman Gray, that he is angry that he was never put to rest properly, not ever put into a casket as was fitting a captain of his stature? Whatever you believe, I do want to leave you with this. As many stories as there are always two sides to a story. Whichever one you believe is up to you. Happy Halloween. Happy hauntings.